A cold wind blew through the observation dome as high theorist Zelvar stared into the void, his three eyes flickering in unison. Around him, towering crystalline consoles pulsed with data streams too complex for any single mind to fully comprehend. The equation had consumed them all, entire generations of scholars, philosophers, and quantum logicians. Yet it remained unsolved. It wasn't just a problem. It was a boundary, an impassable wall between their species and something greater. The equation of eternity, as it came to be known, was not merely a mathematical curiosity. It was the key to understanding the fundamental structure of reality. Embedded within its symbols were the patterns that govern time, space, and perhaps even consciousness itself. For over 5,000 cycles, the greatest minds of the Vorthan Concord had tried every method imaginable. Recursive analysis, multidimensional modeling, even consciousness-linking techniques that fused hundreds of thinkers into singular thought forms. None had succeeded. Each attempt unraveled at the final step, as if the universe itself refused to reveal its secret. Zelvar remembered when he first encountered the equation, as a young acolyte in the grand archives of Nerith. His mentors had warned him not to waste time on it, but he had been drawn in like so many before him. He had spent decades refining algorithms, testing hypotheses, only to watch each one collapse under its own weight. Now, centuries later, he stood as the last living theorist from the original project. All others had passed, either into death or ascension, leaving him alone with the burden of knowledge. The council had declared the equation unsolvable. Some believed it was a flaw in their perception, a limitation imposed by the architecture of their minds. Others whispered darker theories, that the equation was not meant to be solved by any being, that it was a test or trap left behind by something older than the stars. But Zelvar refused to accept defeat. There had to be another way, and so, in desperation, they turned their gaze outward, to the primitive blue world orbiting a minor yellow sun. Humans, the name barely registered in the annals of galactic history. A species barely past its own technological adolescence, chaotic, illogical, and unpredictable. They lacked the precision of the Vorthan intellect, the discipline of the Ziri, or the patience of the Koradi. And yet, there were anomalies, moments where a single human mind had pierced truths that eluded entire civilizations. A poet who predicted cosmic entropy in metaphor. A child who solved a logic puzzle meant for AI constructs. A janitor who redefined fluid dynamics while doodling on a break room napkin. It was absurd. It was reckless. But after millennia of failure, absurdity was all they had left. The delegation arrived without ceremony, cloaked in passive observation fields to avoid disrupting the fragile ecosystem of Earth. Their contact was chosen at random. A university lecturer named Dr. Elias Grant, mid-career, unremarkable by most metrics. He taught advanced calculus, wrote papers that never made the top journals, and spent more time debating with students than publishing. He was, by all accounts, ordinary. But then again, so was the equation. Until it wasn't. The air in the university cafe was thick with the scent of overbrewed coffee and the quiet hum of student conversation. Dr. Elias Grant sat hunched over a chipped mug, scribbling notes on the back of a receipt with one hand while scrolling lazily through his phone with the other. His mind wasn't fully engaged, just drifting between problems, half-formed ideas, and the occasional stray thought about dinner plans. That's when they approached him. They didn't look like much, at least not at first. Two figures, dressed in plain coats, sat down across from him without asking. One was tall, with sharp features and eyes that didn't quite track like human eyes should. The other was shorter, unremarkable in appearance except for the way they never blinked. Elias glanced up, mildly annoyed but too tired to care enough to object. "Dr. Grant?" the taller one said, voice smooth and oddly resonant, like it was being filtered through something just outside normal hearing. Elias nodded warily. "We have a question," the shorter one continued. "A problem." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small tablet. No brand name, no visible ports or buttons. He placed it on the table and tapped the screen once. A symbol appeared, an equation so dense, so layered with meaning, that Elias almost felt a physical pressure in his skull just looking at it. He frowned. "What is this?" "A mathematical construct," the tall one said. "It has defied resolution for millennia." Elias leaned forward, squinting slightly. It wasn't anything he recognized. Not standard calculus, not tensor algebra, not even quantum logic as he understood it. But there was something familiar beneath the complexity. Pattern buried deep. He grabbed a napkin from the dispenser beside him and started sketching. No dramatic pause, no grand gesture, just a quiet man in a coffee shop, doodling on a napkin like he was figuring out a tip. The two observers watched in silence as his fingers moved with growing confidence. Symbols flowed from his pen like instinct, not calculation. He muttered under his breath, corrected himself twice, then stopped, looked at what he'd written, nodded once. "There," he said, pushing the napkin toward them. "That should do it." They stared at it, then at him, then back at the napkin. Elias shrugged, took a sip of his coffee, and went back to his phone. Behind him, the two figures sat frozen, their expressions unreadable. But inside their minds, alarms were ringing. Cross-checks were running. Systems were failing to find any flaw in what had just been written. The equation of eternity, unsolved for 5,000 cycles, had just been cracked in under 3 minutes. By a human, on a napkin. The data transfer was instantaneous. Across the void of interstellar space, encrypted pulses burst from the observation node orbiting Earth, racing toward the Vorthan homeworld at speeds that bent time itself. The message was simple. Solution acquired. Within moments, the entire research division was reactivated. Dormant AI constructs stirred from centuries-long hibernation, their neural matrices flickering to life with a singular directive: verify. Every line of the human scribble was scanned, cross-referenced, and run through thousands of simulated environments. The result was always the same. It worked. Not just logically, not just mathematically, but elegantly. The solution didn't just resolve the equation of eternity. It reframed it. Where the Vorthan had spent millennia dissecting its structure like surgeons probing a dead body, the human had treated it like a living thing, something to be understood intuitively, not just calculated. Across the galaxy, reaction was swift. The High Council convened an emergency session, a rare occurrence in an era where most decisions were handled by consensus algorithms. Even they could not ignore this. The implications were staggering. If a single human mind could achieve what no Vorthan could, then perhaps the limits they had accepted for generations were never real at all. On board the Deep Space Observatory Kethare, a team of karate engineers reran the solution through their quantum processors. Within seconds, their long-stalled project on temporal field stabilization reached completion. A breakthrough that should have taken another century had been achieved overnight. One of them, a senior physicist named Tvash, whispered something unheard among his kind before. "Beautiful." Word spread like fire. Other species took notice. The Zeiri, known for their rigid logic structures, attempted to reverse-engineer the human's thought process, only to find no formal methodology, just intuition layered over raw insight. The MYRRN collective, beings of pure energy who communicated through harmonic resonance, translated the solution into sound and found it harmonized with the fundamental frequencies of the universe itself. Back on Earth, nothing changed, at least not outwardly. Dr. Elias Grant finished his coffee, packed up his things, and walked out of the cafe without a second glance at the two silent figures behind him. He didn't know what he had done. He wouldn't know for years. Perhaps he never would. But across the stars, civilizations that had once dismissed humanity as primitive now paused, watched more closely, wondered. For the first time in recorded history, the Vorthan Concord issued a formal decree not of conquest, not of caution, but of curiosity. Observe, learn, understand. Because if one human could solve the unsolvable, what else were they capable of? And more importantly, what else had they already done, unnoticed? The napkin was preserved. Not in a museum, not in a vault, but suspended in a quantum-stabilized field aboard the Vorthan Ascendancy's central archive. Encased in translucent energy, it rotated slowly, endlessly, as if the universe itself wished to study it just a little longer. Scholars from a dozen species made pilgrimages to see it, not for its physical form, but for what it represented. A moment, a spark, a solution that changed everything. It became known as the human lemma, a term coined by the Karate after they realized that the human's approach wasn't just a new method, it was a new way of thinking. The lemma didn't follow traditional logic chains. It leapt. It danced between assumptions and emerged whole. Treated paradox not as an obstacle but as a tool. And once understood, it opened doors that had been sealed for eons. The first breakthrough came within weeks. Using the lemma as a foundation, the Vorthon succeeded in stabilizing their long-theorized temporal bridge, a construct that could peer into alternate timelines without collapsing causality. The Zeori, after decades of failed simulations, finally achieved conscious AI synthesis by applying the same principles of nonlinear cognition. Even the MYRRN, beings who had never before acknowledged a solid species as equals, composed harmonic symphonies based on the lemma's structure and declared humanity resonant. But perhaps the greatest shift wasn't technological, it was philosophical. For millennia, the galaxy had believed intelligence was a linear path, that knowledge accumulated like layers, each civilization building upon the last with increasing precision. But humanity defied that model. They didn't build, they broke. They shattered assumptions, redefined problems, and solved equations not because they were smarter, but because they thought differently. That difference became the subject of countless studies. How could a species so young, so chaotic, produce minds capable of unraveling cosmic riddles? Was it their biology, their culture, or something deeper? An ability to hold contradiction, to embrace uncertainty, to find meaning in the absurd? Some called it intuition, others madness. But those who studied humanity closely began to use another word: potential. The Vorthon Concord issued a formal invitation, unprecedented for an unaligned species. Not for war, not for trade, for collaboration. Humanity was asked to join the Galactic Symposium of Minds, a gathering of the most advanced thinkers across known space. Not as students, not as subjects of study, as equals. Back on Earth, Dr. Elias Grant never received the letter. He continued teaching calculus, grading papers, and occasionally doodling equations on restaurant napkins. He never knew his scribble had become legend. He never saw the towering monument erected in his name on a distant moon, nor heard the speeches given in his honor by beings he would never meet. And maybe that was better, because the story wasn't about him alone. It was about all of them, the billions of unpredictable, messy, brilliant humans scattered across a pale blue dot. It was about the fact that sometimes the answer isn't found through centuries of refinement, but through one person at one moment seeing the world just a little differently. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the cosmos, a napkin still spins quietly in the dark, reminding the universe that sometimes brilliance comes not from power or perfection, but from chaos, curiosity, and the courage to ask, what if?